Welcome to Office Hours, and today we are going to talk about historical records, issuing historical records. If you're new to Office Hours, this is where we give a brief presentation about a selected topic, and then we will open up the floor to questions and answers after we're done with our talk. And we do record these sessions and post them to the website, so anyone who isn't able to make it to the live version of Office Hours can watch them later. Because we're recording, we want you to keep your microphones off, camera off during the presentation. Once we're done with the talk, we'll open up, turn on the lights, whatever it's called, and let you unmute yourself and ask questions. But don't feel like you need to wait with those questions. As they come up, go ahead and enter them in chat. Anne is here, the man behind the curtain, who is monitoring the chat. And if anything, if she needs to interrupt me for anything, she will do that. Otherwise, we'll just address those questions later. So today we are revisiting and revising instructions for issuing historical records. We've talked about this before, and I just want to recognize before we get started that I know your job is really complex. You have to deal with eligibility and the ID of your customers, reviewing the application, and we're throwing another thing at you here, the age of the vital record. But don't despair. We're also introducing a new tool to help make it easier for you to remember. And if you don't remember, you can refer back to the tool. So we'll show you that in just a sec. As always with Office Hours, we root our direction and talk in the laws. And what you're seeing on the screen is the Minnesota Revisor website where all Minnesota laws are posted for public viewing. And historical records touch a lot of laws. When we talk about historical records, let's first define them. Those are records that were initially filed on paper before electronic vital records registration began. And these records cover a lot of years, and they're regulated by a whole bunch of Minnesota state statutes and administrative rules. And I told you that we are going to introduce a new job aid. This is a quick peek at it. It's available on the website, and I will show you how to find it right now. This is the Minnesota Department of Health website. Go down to click Get a Birth Certificate, and then follow this gray menu bar down the side to Resources for County Vital Records Offices. And then the MRNC user guides go down to issuing historical birth and death records. And there it is for you. You can print it off and make notes on it while we're talking or just know where to find it. But as you can see, there's two different workflows on here, and we will discuss those in detail as we go along today. So first thing we're going to talk about is certificates, certified copies. We're specifically focusing on those certified documents that people need to do whatever it is they need to do, the legal things. So, and you all know that MRNC, the Minnesota Registration and Certification System, is our system. It's where Minnesota hospitals and funeral homes register records and where you fulfill customer requests. Did you also know that because MRNC tracks fees and surcharges and records documents issued from a record, every vital records transaction must be entered in MRNC? Now, I know that for some of you, this hasn't been a common practice. We're focusing on the future here. So starting today, every vital records transaction must be entered in MRNC. So this is one of the two workflows that are on that new job aid we're going to go through this in detail so you can see how it works. And we'll start easy with birth certificates. Let me enlarge that. So a birth certificate is a birth certificate all day long. They are always issued electronically through MRNC on security paper. And if the birth record is so old that it isn't in the system, we will add it upon request so that you can issue a certificate just like you would issue a certificate from a birth that happened last month. So birth certificates are always issued electronically, and this is the form that you use to request for us to add a record, and it's not a new form. When we get this form, our steps there are on the screen. We're going to search the Historical Society archives for the record. And occasionally we may have to ask you, the county of birth, for the record. But this form is on the MDH website along with other resources for you. Once again, not new. I think everybody's aware of it. Now we're moving on to death certificates and certified copies of death records. And this is where it's really important when you're issuing a certified copy to pay attention to the year that the death occurred. The flow chart breaks this down into 3 notable time periods. And here's the short story. Current records that were filed in 1997 and later were filed electronically and issued through MRNC, just like birth certificates are. Death records that were filed between 1908 and 1997 were originally filed on paper, and customers receive a plain paper copy of that record that is embossed to certify it. The oldest records, those from 1907 and earlier, are only available in the county where the death occurred, but the process to issue certified copies is the same. Copy the record on plain paper and emboss it to certify it. Now, we'll look at each of these time periods individually, starting with the easiest one. The first electronic death records were filed in 1997, and even though the system has changed, the process is still the same today. These records are issued through MRNC. So, enter a customer service request with the name of the customer, the payment, link the record to the request, and fulfill through MRNC on security paper. Now we're getting to where you have to remember. Death records from 1908 through 1996. These records were originally filed on paper, and the paper records live in the county of death, and OVR, the Office of Vital Records at the state, has an image of each of them on microfilm. When you need to issue a certified copy of one of these death records, open a customer service request, just like usual. Link the record to the request. And when you look up the record, you're going to notice that the status looks unfinished. This is your cue that this is one of those historical records, and you'll need to locate the paper record or request a copy of it from OVR. And what you're going to issue is a plain paper copy of that record that has been embossed or stamped to certify it. That's what you're going to give to the customer. So remember that unfinished status actually means it's an indexed record. Here's the deal. Years ago, OVR had to make a decision about maintaining and issuing these historical records. If you're familiar with them, if you've been doing this for a while, you know that many of the old paper records are less than clear. And we really had no idea how often or if people would be requesting these old records. So instead of trying to do the data entry of all of that information, knowing that doctors have really technical and abbreviated causes of death, and it's pretty much always handwritten and not so neat, they're hard to decipher. So what we did is we created an index of all these records so that you and we can know what records are available. So when you see unfinished, take that as your cue that this is a historical record and will be issued differently. This is the proverbial exception to the rule. We're doing these a little differently. When issuing one of these records, the first thing you need is the record itself or an image of the record. Print or copy that record on plain paper and emboss it to certify it for the customer, but don't forget to enter the request in MRNC. And because you aren't issuing that certificate or that certified copy, I should say, electronically, you do have to manually change the request status to fulfilled when you're done. Not every MRNC user has the role that's required to change a request status, but every location has at least one person who does have that necessary role. If the status is grayed out for you when you're in that customer service request and you cannot make the change, ask a supervisor or a coworker to search for the request in the work queue and update the status. And that will get that request out of your work queue and keep everything rolling along for you. OVR's goal is for customers to be able to request records from any location. And we're giving you permission to request a copy of historical records from us to provide the best service to our customers. The images that are supplied by OVR are part of the Minnesota State Vital Records System, just like the electronic records are. And when you request an image, please be clear about what you want. Help with the record may seem to describe your need, but that email isn't going to get to the right place. When asking for an image, send an email to health.vitalrecords@state.mn.us with the subject line saying image of historical record needed. And please think of this photo of one of our microfilm cartridges. They're cataloged by state file number. So please include that in the email, along with the subject's name, date of death for confirmation. Now, I can't make promises about turnaround time, but we do try to get the image back to you within the same day. And for those of you who are trying to scribble down that email address, all of this information is included in that job aid. How to do the request, all of that information is right there in the job aid. So that's available to you. Okay. The last type of certified death record we're going to discuss today is those very old death records from 1907 and earlier. Now, OVR does not have the images of those records, and they're not indexed in MRNC. Requests for death certificates from 1907 or earlier need to go to the county of death. Customers who need a certified copy have to go directly to the county of death. And if that's your county, the process for issuing certified copies is the same as it is for the 1908 through 1996 records. Just enter a customer service request in MRNC with the requester information for our records, and then you can't link that record to the request. So enter the name of the deceased and their date of death in the notes field of that request. Then copy the image on plain paper and certify it, and make sure to change the status of the request to fulfilled manually.
So before we continue, sorry, there are a few questions in chat. Do you want to take those now?
Okay.
Do we do non-certified birth death through MRNC also?
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Okay. Are you going to go through the steps to do the request on MRNC for these old death certificates, creating a request and fulfilling?
I wasn't planning to do a demonstration. I am assuming that you are used to entering those requests in MRNC. It's the same as if you're entering a request for a record that's in MRNC, how you search for the record and link it to the request. So it's not different than what you're used to doing.
Okay, are you going to go, those deaths are usually aligned in a ledger, so we use a form. We can't print it on plain paper. Is there a form that we are supposed to use when the death record is in an old book?
No, we don't have a form for you. You can follow your process that you're using now and make sure you enter that request in MRNC.
Thank you, that was it.
Okay. So just to summarize what we've talked about with certified records, enter a MRNC customer service request for every transaction. This is not just to track fees, it's also capturing that really important issuance history. Birth certificates are always issued the same way, regardless of the age of the record. Issuing death certificates and certified copies of death records can be different depending on the age of the record. If the death record was filed before 1997, the customer is going to receive a photocopy of the record on plain paper that has been certified. And never copy an historical record on security paper because that's not a valid certificate. So that was certified copies. Let's move on to those non-certified documents, informational copies. Talk about those first. And once again, customer service request in MRNC is still going to be required for issuing non-certified documents too. Link the state file number to the request. It's so important. And once again, an unfinished status on a death record means that it's a historical record that has been indexed for you. So it's not really different. The job aid has a workflow for these informational copies too. Let's go through that in detail. And we'll start with birth records. Notice that the non-certified flow has 2 columns for birth records. That's because some birth records were filed electronically, and earlier records filed before 2002 were filed on paper. Customers who are requesting a non-certified document from a record from 2001 or earlier can choose from a computer printout, a transcript legal, or photocopy of the paper birth record. This is what that looks like. This is the difference. On the left is a non-certified transcript legal. You can print this from any birth record in MRNC, even the old ones, but because the standard birth data file has changed over the years, not all fields may be populated on older records. On the right is a photocopy of a birth record where I've obscured the identifying information, but if the record was filed in 2001 or earlier, customers can choose to get this photocopy instead of a legal transcript when they want a non-certified copy. And that photocopy is somehow more romantic. Customers would like them, but just remember, don't offer it for a current record, anything from 2002 or later, because those were never filed on paper. There aren't any paper records there. So if you're issuing a copy of a paper record, you're still going to enter customer service request in MRNC, link it to the record, link the record to the request before making that plain paper copy for your customer. But because health information on birth records is classified as private data, you must redact that private public health data that appears on birth records. Private health data means data about the mother, and because birth records have had many iterations over the years, it may show up in several different ways or not at all, because there were some records where the health information was filed on a supplementary document. But anyhow, most of the historical records will show previous pregnancy history, and that should always be redacted. And there's several ways to do this. You can copy the record and black out or cross out the information on the copy, or you can use the computer to place a filled text box or shape to cover data more neatly. So here's that same slide as before, but now I have colored the text boxes to show where data has been redacted. I would color the text boxes white before printing. I just made them green to illustrate this on for this talk. It tends to invite questions when things are very obviously covered up, but I wanted to show you how that works. And just as with historical death records, OVR will provide redacted images of historical birth records upon request. The same instructions apply. Send an email to health.vitalrecords@state.mn.us and tell us the state file number, the subject's name, and date of birth, and we will get it back to you as quickly as we can. Now, sometimes you're going to receive a request for a non-certified copy of an old record that isn't in MRNC, and it doesn't need to be for you to fulfill their non-certified request. In this case, you're not going to have a state file number, so we're going to need additional information so that we can identify the right birth record. Please include your name and your phone number in these situations in case we need to verify things. But we don't need to add the record to MRNC for a non-certified request, and we will give you a photocopy of that record or an image of that record if we can find it. So now let's switch over to death records, non-certified copies. And these are issued just the same as the certified copies with a couple of notable exceptions. Current records from 1997 and later, non-certified transcripts are printed on plain paper, and the earlier records are still copied on plain paper, but you obviously omit the steps to certify them. MRNC customer service requests are still required to issue non-certified death documents because death record registration was computerized in 1997. Any record from that time or later has no paper record, and issuance is fully electronic. Non-certified requests for death records from before 1997 are entered in MRNC. Customer service requests and the paper record or an image supplied by OVR is copied or printed on plain paper. And once again, records before 1908, not available from OVR. Customers do need to go to the county of death to obtain those records. So once again, MRNC customer service requests required for every transaction, including the non-certified documents that are printed on plain paper. OVR will supply images of all the records we have available to help you fulfill customer requests for births and deaths which occurred in other counties. Now, OVR doesn't have access to records for births prior to 1900 or deaths prior to 1908, but we'll give you what we've got. When you send an email to our office to request an image, we don't need a story, but we do need to know exactly what you need. Here's a sample email. Image of a historical record needed. The state file number of the death record is whatever it is, the subject of the record and the name and the date of death. That's all we need. And again, if you are requesting a historical birth that's not in the system, there won't be a state file number. So provide whatever additional information you have to help us identify the record and include your phone number in case we have questions. And for those locations that are sitting on a wealth of history in the form of vital records, thank you. Please continue to safely store and preserve Minnesota history. Now, I want to summarize here that any location can issue a birth certificate. Any location can issue a death certificate from 1908 to the present. All birth certificates, certified copies of birth records are issued through MRNC the same way. A birth certificate is a birth certificate all day long. And certified and non-certified copies of current death records are issued through MRNC the same way. OVR will provide you with copies of historical records upon request, and that will help you facilitate issuing these certificates and non-certified documents for your customers, no matter where they are. We really want people who come to the Vital Records office in Mahnomen County to get the same records, the same results that they would get if they went to Anoka County or wherever they are in the state. So we're doing this to help you provide uniform service throughout the state. As always, the help desk is your resource and first call for help when you have questions. And don't forget to take that training tracker survey. It's now at the bottom of the page on the website for County Vital Record offices. And thank you so much for your time today. Now we are going to turn off the recording and